Dearest listeners, now introducing
The progression of women's rights and responsibilities underscores the need for gender equality while also highlighting the balance of personal freedoms in areas such as education, employment, and political association.
During the Progressive Era, a turn-of-the-century political movement era, interested in furthering social and political reform and curbing political corruption, women demanded to be seen as full citizens of the United States. From the years 1890 through 1920, this period was known as the Women's Era, because it was then that women started to have more significant economic and political opportunities. Women were also aided by legal changes, like getting the right to own property, control their wages, and make contracts and wills. Women in America have always contributed to the economy as producers and consumers. And they always worked, whether for wages or caring for children and the home. Women have always had a responsibility to uphold throughout history, but men have always had the rights. This documentary will be of service to you, listening to the experiences had and the opportunities given to women fighting for their rights and living out their responsibilities.
women have spoken out about a change in America since before World War I and during. To further their cause, President Woodrow Wilson half-heartedly endorsed women's suffrage in 1916, but World War I furthered the movement. Most suffrage organizations believed that wartime service would help women earn respect and equal rights. Still, other activists, like many progressive, opposed the war and regarded it as a potential threat to social reform. Yet, in the end, the war did help the cause. Patriotic support of the war by women, especially their service time working in wartime industries, convinced many that it was just wrong to deny them the right to vote. The mistreatment of Alice Paul, who was a vocal leader of the 20th century's women's suffrage movement, and other women in prison for their cause, created outrage that further pushed the Wilson administration to support enfranchising women. Alice Paul advocated for and helped secure passage of the 19th Amendment, soon to come to the U.S. Constitution, granting women the right to vote.
Now, we fought the public accommodations fight 10 years ago with the blacks. Are we going to have to start all over again with women?
How about, would you like a sign up there that said blacks only or whites only? It's the same principle, sir. Women are persons, women are people.
And we want to be able to come and go through it, and we don't want to be intimidated by signs that say men's buffet.
Now, the main demand, of course, is equal rights. Equal rights to have a job, to have respect, to not be viewed as a piece of meat. Equal rights to set forth our own humanity. Equal rights to get into graduate programs, to get into schools, to training programs. We're the bottom third of the employment in terms of pay. We represent, nonetheless, 34% of the workforce, yet we're the first to be laid off and the last to be hired. There aren't frivolous demands at all. We just want what men have had all these years.
Many women have devoted their lives to fighting for rights and speaking out against gender discrimination for women, like Alice Paul. Many were recognized for their bravery, beliefs, and dedications to women's rights throughout history to present times. The following women have had positive impacts from generation to generation. Malala Yousafzai was a Pakistani education advocate who became the youngest Nobel Peace Prize recipient in 2014. Yousafzai survived an assassination attempt by the Taliban at age 15 for speaking out against girls' education. Elizabeth Cady Stanton was a women's suffrage movement leader who helped organize the 1848 Seneca Falls Convention. She also wrote the Declaration of Rights for Women and drafted a federal suffrage amendment. Lucretia Mott was a Quaker minister and schoolteacher who is considered a founder of the American women's suffrage movement. She was also a civil rights advocate and abolitionist. Women's most significant influence came through membership and leadership in the Women's Christian Temperance Union, also known as the WCTU, which was founded in 1874. By 1890, it had 150,000 members, making it the most prominent female organization in the United States, under the leadership of Frances Willard. The WCTU embraced a broad reform agenda, like it included pushing for the right for women to vote. Though the suffrage movement was very important, it was highly fragmented. There was a first wave of suffrage, which was exemplified by the women at Seneca Falls, and this metamorphosed into the National American Women's Suffrage Association, also known as NASA. Most of the leadership of NASA was made up of middle to upper class women, often involved in other progressive causes, who unfortunately sometimes represented the darker side of the suffrage movement, because these upper-class progressives frequently use nativist arguments to make their claims for the right to vote. They argued that if the vote could be granted to ignorant immigrants, some of whom could barely speak English, then it should be also given to native-born women. The passage and ratification of the 19th Amendment is a big deal in American history. The amendment says that states cannot deny the people the right to vote because they are women. Women's long fight to gain the right to vote ended with the ratifying of the 19th Amendment in 1920. Now that women could independently vote, they began to understand their responsibility. When an election came around, they were to speak up if they disagreed with bills, laws, etc. With this right to vote came the responsibility to abide as an American citizen. While the passage of the 19th Amendment was a huge victory, Alice Paul and the National Party could not muster the same support for the Equal Rights Amendment.
As women gained greater rights and recognition, they began to enter professions and industries previously closed to them, one of many being teaching and education. Women had been involved in teaching for centuries, but the women's rights movement led to greater access to higher education and professional advancement. By the late 19th and early 20th centuries, women increasingly became school teachers and administrators. Many universities began accepting female students, expanding women access to academic fields. The women's rights movement helped push for legal changes that enabled more women to join the workforce. For instance, the passage of the 19th Amendment in 1920, which granted women the right to vote, was a catalyst for broader societal changes, including in employment. During and after World War II, many women entered the workforce in larger numbers as they took on roles left vacant by men who went to war. As the movement progressed, societal views on women's roles in the home and in the workplace began to shift. The traditional notion of women as homemakers was increasingly challenged, and women were encouraged to pursue careers outside the domestic sphere.
Women in the 20th century lacked education, holding them back from other things, such as getting real jobs. This forced them to work in factories or as domestic workers, which were not the safest environments. By the early 20th century, a new generation of college-educated activists had arrived, and many of these women were more radical than early suffrage supporters. A maximum of 2% of all 18 to 24-year-olds were enrolled in an institution of higher education, and just 1/3 were women. In a vindication of the rights of women, Mary Wollstonecraft states that women are not inherently inferior to men, and that they only appear so because they have been denied a proper education, leaving them ignorant. Hence, she advocates for the education of women, specifically co-education with men.
To conclude, with all rights given and included, women have to recognize the responsibility of having equal rights to participate fully in society across all spheres, including political, economic, and social life, while also acknowledging their unique experiences that make their experience different from men in society. The determination for the rights for education, politics, and working opportunities may not have been easy, but they were reasonable and beneficial. Though they may have not been physical, they did appeal to the world emotionally and set up an impact for women across the world, not just in the U.S.